Hello and welcome. In this video, we will be exploring the world of microteaching. First, we will delve into the definition and purpose of microteaching. And then we'll also explore the significance and demand for microteaching skills in the modern-day education system. We'll also talk about the different types of microteaching skills that exist and provide examples of each one. To make things more concrete, I will briefly touch upon each of the microteaching skills and share examples to help illustrate their significance. So buckle up and let's dive right in. Let's start by exploring the concept of microteaching. Microteaching is a technique that involves scaling down the traditional classroom setting. Typically, a microteaching session involves reducing the class size to 5 or 10 students, even fewer, reducing the time of the session to 5 to 15 minutes, and minimizing the content to focus on specific skills. In simple terms, microteaching is a scaled-down teaching encounter that allows educators to focus on definable, observable, measurable, and controllable teaching skills. By breaking down the teaching process into small, manageable components, microteaching enables educators to enhance their teaching abilities and better understand their teaching strengths and weaknesses. The objective of microteaching are twofold. First, it helps to lessen the complexities that often exist in a traditional classroom setting. By reducing the size of the class and the amount of content, educators can hone in on specific skills and techniques, allowing for a more focused and effective learning experience. Secondly, mastering microteaching skills can help educators develop confidence in their abilities, which can motivate them to continue to grow and develop as teachers. Ultimately, microteaching provides an excellent opportunity for educators to fine-tune their skills, improve their teaching strategies, and become more effective educators. Microteaching provides a safe and controlled environment for educators to practice their teaching skills. By breaking down the teaching process into smaller, more manageable parts, educators can focus on developing specific skills such as classroom management and communication with students. The steps involved in microteaching include orientation, discussion of teaching skills, selection of a particular teaching skill, presentation of a model demonstration lesson, observation and criticism of the model lesson, preparation of a micro lesson plan, practice of the skill in a teach session, providing feedback on feedback sessions, replanning and reteaching sessions, and integrating teaching skills. And during the microteaching process, educators can receive feedback from a variety of sources, including oral feedback from a teacher trainer, questionnaires filled out by students in the micro lesson, and audio and video recordings. By developing microteaching skills, educators can become more effective teachers and improve student learning outcomes. Through practice and experience, educators can refine their skills and achieve success in the classroom. So, if you're an educator looking to improve your teaching skills, microteaching is a great place to start. So, now that we've discussed all of those, let's take a closer look at the types of microteaching skills. So let's talk about it. We'll talk only about the microteaching skills that are commonly used in language classrooms. So these are skill of introduction, skill of explaining, skill of questioning, skill of demonstration, skill of reinforcement, skill of closure, skill of stimulus variation, skill of blackboard, and of course there are more, but these are the most basic ones. First up is the skill of introduction. The skill of introduction refers to the ability to begin a lesson in an engaging and effective way. This could involve using an attention-grabbing opening statement, posing a thought-provoking question, or using multimedia to pique students' interests. A good introduction sets the tone for the rest of the lesson and can make all the difference in capturing students' attention and motivating them to learn. One important way to do this is by utilizing students' previous experiences. By connecting the new material to their existing knowledge, schemata, and experiences, students are more likely to be engaged and motivated to learn. In addition to using previous experiences, there are a variety of techniques that can be used to effectively introduce a lesson. These include questioning, narration, storytelling, demonstration, using audiovisual aids, dramatization, and use of examples. By varying the techniques used, teachers can appeal to a wider range of learning styles and keep students engaged and motivated. Let me give you an example of connecting new material to existing knowledge. So let's say that in a lesson you want to teach, for example, vocabulary related to emergency services. One way to connect new material to the existing knowledge is to share some images with the students, images of emergency services in their own countries. Another important aspect of introducing a lesson is maintaining continuity in the ideas and information being presented. This can be achieved through careful planning and organization of the lesson content. It's also important to ensure that verbal and nonverbal behavior is relevant to the introduction and consistent with the goals of the lesson. In one of our next videos, we'll dive deeper into the importance of texts and activating schemata. These are important concepts to understand in order to effectively introduce lessons and engage students in the learning process. So stay tuned for those videos. Next, we have the skill of explaining. The skill of explaining involves breaking down complex concepts into understandable parts. Effective explanation is essential for helping students grasp difficult concepts and retain the information they learn. This ability to explain complex concepts clearly and effectively is essential for language teachers. This skill involves using appropriate beginning statements, explaining links, and testing students' understanding through questions and checks for comprehension. A good explanation should also end with an appropriate concluding statement. However, there are also some undesirable behaviors to avoid when explaining or narrating. These include using irrelevant statements, a lack of continuity in statements, inappropriate vocabulary that is above the learner's level, and vague words and phrases. In addition to traditional explanation, guided discovery or discovery learning is another teaching technique that can be used to facilitate language learning. This approach involves presenting students with a problem or task and guiding them towards discovering the solution or learning target language form, pronunciation, or appropriate use, so M, F, P, and A. This approach can be particularly effective in promoting critical thinking and student engagement, but is not really appreciated by some types of students. For example, some adult learners may not really appreciate it. In one of our next videos, we'll delve deeper into guided discovery and explore the concept of meaning, form, pronunciation, and appropriacy. So stay tuned for that one. The skill of questioning is another important microteaching skill. Skilled questioning involves asking open-ended questions that encourage students to think critically and engage in discussion. Good questioning techniques help to deepen students' understanding of the material being taught. There are different types of questions that can be used, including lower order questions that require recall of information from textbooks, from texts, middle order questions that require students to rephrase and explain information in their own words, and higher order questions that require students to apply the information in a new context. For more information on this, you can check Bloom's taxonomy. Probing questions are another important aspect of questioning skills. These are questions that are used to dig deeper into a topic, clarify information, and challenge students' thinking. Some examples of probing techniques include promoting for further information, prompting for further information, refocusing the discussion, increasing critical awareness, and redirecting the conversation. It's important to keep in mind certain criteria when formulating questions, such as simplicity, conciseness, and relevancy. So the question should be direct. If they are not, then language learners might have difficulties understanding them. They also need to be specific, of course, grammatically correct, and they should be clear and audible. By using these criteria, teachers can ensure that their questions are effective and appropriate for their students. Now, let's talk about some specific types of questions. ICQs and CCQs. What are these? Well, ICQs are questions that teachers ask to check whether their students have understood the instructions for a task or activity. So these are instruction checking questions. These questions can help to avoid confusion and ensure that all students are on the same page. CCQs, concept checking questions, are questions that teachers ask to check whether students have understood a particular concept or language point. These questions can be used to clarify meaning, promote critical thinking, and ensure that students have a deeper understanding of the language. By incorporating ICQs and CCQs into your lessons, and of course planning for those, writing them up front, you can help your students to better understand the language and concepts you're teaching and ensure that they are on track to achieving their learning goals. ICQs and CCQs can be adapted to any topic or language point that you're teaching, and the important thing is to ask questions that are clear and specific again. I can't stress that enough, and that requires students to demonstrate their understanding of the material. By asking these types of questions, you can ensure that your students are actively engaged in the learning process and are making progress towards their language learning goals. So let's look at some examples of ICQs and CCQs that you can use in your language classroom. So some examples of ICQs are, let's say, the following. Are we going to work individually or in pairs? So you check whether the students have understood that the instructions told them to work individually. Or how much time do you have to complete this task? 5, 10 minutes? How much? Are you supposed to write your answers in complete sentences? Yes, no? For example, when they are writing answers to comprehension questions after a text. Should you use a pen or pencil to fill in the blanks? Or do you need to include the title in your essay? Concept checking questions. Let's say that we are teaching grammar, the present simple tense, and we have a sentence. I usually get up at 7 a.m. What are the CCQs, concept checking questions? Do I do that every day? Yes or no? Is this a habit? Yes or no? Another example, present continuous tense. She's riding a bicycle. The first CCQ, does she ride a bicycle every day? The second CCQ, is she riding it now? Vocabulary. Another example, his pink car stands out on the road. We are checking for the understanding of stand out, the phrasal verb. The first CCQ, are there many pink cars on the road? CCQ 2, do people pay attention to this car? Again, yes or no. The answer should be yes or no to all of those questions, and it should be correct. The video presentation that we have now will continue with demonstration, which is another critical microteaching skill. This skill involves showing students how to perform a particular task or skill, such as how to correctly pronounce a word or use a particular grammatical structure. Also, by showing your students how to do something, demonstrating, you can help them to understand it more fully and make sure that they are doing it correctly. Let's say that you have a productive activity at the end of your lesson, a 15-minute productive activity. Demonstrating with a strong student is a really good example, like demonstrating in open pairs in front of all of the students, showing how they should do it is a great way of making them understand how to do it themselves. So, to demonstrate effectively, there are a number of important factors to keep in mind. First, you need to have a clear objective in mind. What is it that you want your students to learn from the demonstration? Second, you need to make sure that you have all the relevant equipment on hand and that you know how to handle it properly. During the demonstration, it's important to encourage student participation and to use the blackboard to help illustrate your points, or whiteboard or interactive whiteboard, whatever. You should also make sure that your explanation is clear and easy to understand, and that you're pointing to important details and focusing students' attention where it needs to be. Manipulating various parts of the process or skill can also be useful, but be sure to use precautions when necessary. It's important to sequence the demonstration in a logical order so that students can follow along and understand the process step by step. Again, demonstrations could be done alone. You, the teacher, could be done using some aids, or could be done with the assistance of a strong student. In our example, earlier example of a productive activity with a stronger student, if we have a complex activity, productive activity, we need to fine-tune and stage the whole process step by step. Another thing that is important is to effectively illustrate your lessons with examples that your students can easily relate to. Let's look at some examples, how to effectively do this. So give concrete examples. When teaching new vocabulary, use concrete examples that students can easily visualize. It could be, well, for low-level learners, for example, when teaching the word apple, a banal thing, bring in an actual apple to show the class, not a word card. This will help students to make a clear connection between the word and its meaning. Then you can use interesting examples. Using them and also using engaging examples can help to capture your students' attention and make your lessons more memorable. For example, when teaching the past continuous tense, you could use an example such as, I was eating dinner when my cat jumped on the table and knocked over a glass of water. Also, relevant examples. It's important to use examples that are relevant to your students' lives and experiences. If you're teaching a lesson about jobs and careers, you could ask your students to share examples of jobs they are interested in or know someone who works in that field. And then we should also use appropriate media. Using appropriate media can also be an effective way to illustrate your lessons. For example, if you're teaching a lesson on weather, you could show a short video clip or picture of a tornado to help students better understand the concept. However, it is important to make sure that the media you use is appropriate for the age and level of your students and that it doesn't distract them from the lesson. Some more concrete examples, for example, let's say that you're teaching new vocabulary related to food. You could bring in real examples of the foods or show pictures to help students make connections between the words and the objects. If you're teaching advanced learners, let's say idiomatic expressions, you're teaching about those, you could use interesting and fun examples like "it's raining cats and dogs" or "don't cry over spilled milk" to make the content more engaging and to illustrate the let's say the lack of any connection between cats and dogs in the idiom and the meaning. If you're teaching about culture, you could use interesting examples of traditions or customs from different countries to encourage students to learn more about other cultures. If you're teaching about job interviews, business English, you could use relevant examples of questions and answers that students might encounter in real-life interviews. If you're teaching about travel vocabulary, you could use relevant examples of common travel situations like booking a hotel or asking for directions. Appropriate media, let's say that you're teaching listening skills, you could use audio or video clips that are appropriate for the student's level and interest. So don't use some listening clips that are too advanced. If you're teaching reading skills, you could use authentic materials like news articles or short stories to provide relevant and engaging examples. Students really love authentic materials. Why do they love them? Well, they give them a sense of accomplishment, and they feel that they can actually read something that was authentically or primarily written for native speakers of the language. On to reinforcement. It is another important skill in microteaching. Reinforcement involves providing positive feedback to students when they exhibit desired behaviors or achieve their learning objectives. It can help to motivate students and build their confidence in using the language. Reinforcement can be verbal, extraverbal reinforcement, positive nonverbal reinforcement. It could be the use of extraverbal cues, repeating and rephrasing, and writing the pupil's answer. Positive verbal reinforcement involves using encouraging language to acknowledge and praise students' efforts or good behavior. This could be as simple as saying "great job" or "well done" or "terrific," "brilliant," anything like that. Positive extraverbal reinforcement could be a pat on the back or a high five. Positive nonverbal reinforcement could include a smile or a nod. Using extraverbal cues involves using gestures or signals to communicate with students. For example, you might use a thumb up to signal that a student is on the right track. Repetition and rephrasing can help students better understand and remember information, and writing down their answers can also reinforce their learning. On the other hand, there are also some undesirable behaviors when it comes to reinforcement. These include using negative verbal reinforcement, negative nonverbal reinforcement, wrong use of reinforcement, and inappropriate use. For example, using negative verbal reinforcement could involve criticizing or belittling a student, which can be demotivating and harmful to their self-esteem. All in all, it's important to use reinforcement effectively and appropriately to ensure that students feel encouraged and motivated in their learning. I would like also to mention the fact that you shouldn't overpraise students either. So you shouldn't use a negative reinforcement, that is to say, criticism, but you shouldn't overpraise them either. Onto the skill of closure. It refers to the ability to effectively conclude a lesson. This could involve summarizing key points covered in the lesson, posing reflective questions, or setting the stage for the next lesson. To summarize a lesson and wrap things up, you can use several techniques such as revision, recapitulation, remarks, Blackboard summary, and home assignments. These techniques help to reinforce what students have learned, highlight key points, and provide closure to the lesson. As a teacher, you can also use closure as an opportunity to ask students if they have any questions or concerns, to provide feedback, or to give them an idea of what to expect in the next lesson. Remember that achieving closure is a critical aspect of a successful lesson. People usually remember the last 5 or 10 minutes best of any lesson. That's in human nature. So be sure to plan for it in your lesson planning. I'm talking about the closure. Stimulus variation is another critical microteaching skill. This involves using a variety of teaching techniques and materials to keep students engaged and motivated. Stimulus variation can help to prevent boredom and make the learning experience more enjoyable for students. For example, movements. In a language class, the teacher may monitor students' progress by moving around the classroom, checking on individual or group work, and providing guidance or feedback where necessary while the students are doing something. Also, this way you can make sure that the students are on task. The use of gestures is another one. Effective teachers use gestures to reinforce key points or to help explain new concepts. For example, a teacher might use a hand gesture to indicate the meaning of a particular word or phrase. Change in speech pattern, also intonation. Teachers may vary their tone, pitch, and speed to emphasize important points or to maintain interest. This is like verbal highlighting. For example, a teacher might use a slower, more deliberate pace when introducing new vocabulary, or a faster, more upbeat tempo when discussing a fun activity. Focusing, verbal, gestural, verbal, and gestural. A skilled teacher may use different types of cues, such as verbal or gestural, to focus students' attention on important points. For example, a teacher might use verbal cues to explain a grammar rule, and then use gestural cues to reinforce the explanation. You should also have changes in interaction style. So styles could be, the styles that we have are individual, pair, group work. Why do we do that? Well, to maintain student engagement. For example, students might work individually on a writing task, then work in pairs to discuss their writing, and finally work in groups to present their ideas to the class. Alternatively, they might work individually to answer comprehension questions, then work in pairs to discuss and check the answers, and then they might check those answers in open classroom and expand on those. Pausing. Teachers may use pauses to draw attention to a particular point, to allow time for students to process information or to provide feedback. For example, a teacher might pause before providing a correction to allow students to self-correct their errors. And then we have oral visual switching. A skilled teacher may use a combination of oral and visual aids to enhance student understanding and interest. For example, a teacher might use a video clip to introduce a new topic and then follow up with a class discussion or written activity to reinforce the content. Finally, we have the skill of Blackboard. Effective use of the Blackboard involves organizing information clearly and legibly, using color and diagrams to aid understanding, and erasing unnecessary information to avoid clutter. Obviously, the skill of Blackboard would be the skill of using your tools, sharing your screen, using the virtual Blackboard or whiteboard. So these are all transferable skills. You should have legible handwriting if you're in a physical classroom. Make sure that it is clear, easy to understand, and that your students can follow along with your notes and explanations. Let's say that you're teaching vocabulary. Write each word clearly and with enough space between each word for students to copy them down accurately. Neatness in writing. Keep your writing tidy and organized on the board so that it is easy for students to follow. When writing in chats, use bold, use explanations, make it easy for students to understand what is it that they have there. When writing a dialogue on the board, let's say, or in the chat, use different colors if possible. Use spacing in chats to differentiate between the different speakers and their lines. Orderliness in writing is about arranging the content of the board in a logical order so it is easy to understand and follow. Let's say that you are teaching a grammar point. Use bullet points or numbered lists to show the different rules or structures. That's why sometimes chats might be difficult or difficult to use, or actually not difficult, but rather ungrateful to use, because having those bullet points is difficult there. Variation writing. Use different techniques to make your board work more engaging and interesting for your students. Let's say that you're teaching idioms. Use illustrations or cartoons to help students understand the meaning of the idiom. Use online resources if you're teaching online. Appropriateness, of course, the board should be used in a way that is appropriate for the lesson and the level of the students. Let's say that you're teaching beginners. Use simple drawings or pictures to illustrate new vocabulary words. Adequacy of the Blackboard work with reference with content covered. In this respect, make sure that what you write on the board accurately reflects the content covered in the lesson. When teaching a reading passage, write the main ideas or keywords on the board to help students understand and remember the content. They might copy it into their notebooks, and it might be on their record for revision, for example, at home. Continuity and relevancy in writing. So you should connect what you write on the board to what you have previously covered in previous lessons, or what you will cover in future lessons. So you should have that continuity at the beginning, at the end of each lesson. When teaching a unit, let's say on travel, write the main ideas or keywords on the board for each lesson so that students can see how the lessons are connected. And then underline the important points and use color chalk, use color markers, use, if you're working online, that's even easier to do. So highlight the most important information on the board by underlining or underscoring, or using different colored chalk or markers, virtual, whatnot. Example: when teaching grammar rules, use red ink or chalk to highlight the exceptions or special cases that students need to remember. Also, make use of charts, tables, diagrams, pictures. Use visual aids to help students understand and remember the content covered in the lesson. For example, when teaching the different parts of speech, use a chart or table to show the different categories and examples of each. Also, it's great for teaching phonemes. There are 44 phonemes in the English language. Use charts for those as well. So to conclude, these are just some of the types of microteaching skills that can be used to enhance language learning. By mastering these skills, language teachers can help themselves and can create an engaging and effective learning environment that helps students achieve their language learning objectives. That's all. Have a great day, and thank you for your time.